Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym Podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2022, the topic is nutrition, and the title is Advice for Teens. One of my clients' sons wants to do a bodybuilding show. So he wanted nutrition and training advice for increased strength and muscularity while staying lean, but then how to get lean safely. So I wanted to talk about some of the advice that I gave him, and then we're actually going to be working together now on a regular basis, so he's going to get a lot more individual specific advice along the way. But I wanted to share what we discussed in the initial Zoom consultation with him and his parents, and the general kind of mindset that I would take when working with somebody who's a teenager. He turns 16 in 2 weeks. So we're going to train together to do a bodybuilding show, like actually a men's classic physique, which is a scaled down bodybuilder, when he turns 18, the summer after his senior year. He started lifting when he was 14, absolutely loves it. So he's been doing it for almost 2 years now. His parents said that they don't know if he's ever missed a day. He's super into it. And I've actually talked about when I was younger, that when I first got into all this, I trained every single day for over a year, many times, from the span of 15 years old up till my early 20s. I'd gone several times where I'd a year and never missed a single workout. It was something I loved, super passionate about it. When I first started, we didn't have internet, but I would read magazines as often as I could get them, any books I could get my hands on. And then when we did get the internet, I would download videos and watch stuff all night. I'd get home from school and watch videos and go work out. And the client said that that's what her son is doing, and she loved to see that and thought that maybe he and I working together would be great, in the sense that her son can get good, healthy information, because God knows what's out there now. It's a mixture of good and bad. But then also that her son could learn to avoid the mistakes that I made, so that way they can be healthier, make great progress. And what her and her husband want is, if he has this passion, how can we embrace this but make sure it turns into a healthy component in his life? They don't want him to become consumed by it and or burn out by it and then not want to lift weights or exercise later in life. So they just want to make sure if he's going to do it, how do we help him do it right? That kind of thing. And that's what we're going to do. So currently he's 5'7", weighs 160 pounds, and has a visible six-pack. He's not super peeled, and he'll know this. I'm not saying anything that we didn't talk. He still has what would be seen as kind of a little bit of a baby fat kind of to him. So he's lean, but not peeled, thin skin lean. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing that up is that was something he wanted to have. And so we've been talking along with training and nutrition, but also kind of hormones and what happens as you go through your teenage years with testosterone and estrogen balance. So we'll be navigating that. But he has an amazing physique already. He has very separated muscles. He actually looks like a mini bodybuilder. So he already has the look that is going to transfer very well to competing. For example, he is the most muscular looking kid of his classmates, and he's very humble, so doesn't have a big ego about it, but he looks good. He's noticeably more muscular and more detailed than other people his age. So he already has a great genetic base. Now we want to take that base and expand on it, but do it in a safe and healthy way. I wanted to share in today's podcast 3 topics that were pieces of advice that I gave him as we were talking. Whenever he was basically deciding whether he wanted to work with me or not during the Zoom. So it was fun to just kind of chit-chat a bit and talk about general concepts. And that's what I wanted to share in the podcast. And then the specific stuff that I'll be working with him over the next couple of years, I'm sure I'll make it into some podcasts here and there, but that would be specific stuff and therefore not as applicable to a podcast. So I wanted to talk about the advice I would give teenagers as an overall general approach. When I think through this, I could definitely sit here and make Like, I'm going to do 3 tips of advice and a general conversation, but I could sit and make a podcast series on this. So I'm sure as I go through this, I'll be thinking of more things. But I thought it would be a good introduction. And if a teenager happens to listen to this podcast, and actually have listened this far, I want to tell you what I would tell a client at your age, and this coincides with what I wish I knew at that age as well. So let's go through it. The first thing was to learn what food does and which foods work best for you. What does food do? This is actually very helpful because there isn't a great degree of nutrition education in schools. I've done Big Brother, Big Sister programs, and I've guest taught at schools in elementary, middle school, and high school. I've done that several times, a lot of times, and my gosh, it's in there. It's in the curriculum, but not a lot of reinforcement outside of that. So it's like you learn to speak another language, so you hang out in that country for 3 months, but then you never go back and never hear anyone speak that language for the next 3 or 4 years. You're gonna lose the data. You're gonna lose that ability. So when I talk to the younger kids, it's kind of funny. I've talked to 3rd and 4th graders who knew a good bit about nutrition, but I've talked to middle school and seniors who don't know the basics because they were never taught it again. It's kind of like it's thrown in there here and there, but it's not really developed well. I remember one time I went and taught at a high school, and I was like, can somebody name me some sources of protein? And somebody said banana, and I was like, okay, striking a miss on that, but anybody else? And then somebody else said rice, and I was like, okay, we're done. No more guessing. So they were all laughing, but I was like, oh my gosh. So I said, what you named is just carbs. Like, oh my gosh. So it was a little bit of an eye-opener for me, but still it was very funny and an enjoyable experience, was getting to teach them what food does and what we would want to look for in our meals. So protein is, it repairs and grows tissues in the body, most notably in relation to what this teen wants is it grows muscle tissue. How much of that do we need? The general recommendation is going to be 0.6 grams per pound of body weight, up to 1 gram per pound of body weight. If they're working out on a regular basis, they're in the developmental years, probably a little bit extra protein is going to be helpful. So for this client, we're going to be aiming for around 1 gram per pound of lean body weight. They actually are already lean at 160 pounds, so we're going to be aiming for around 160 grams of protein. We know that if they fall a little bit short on that some days, probably not the end of the world. But do they need to have 2 grams per pound of lean body weight? No. And that's where sometimes it's helpful in any age to give context to what is the recommended amount, what's the needed amount. So I could definitely understand it as a teenager, because this is what I did, is if protein helps me build muscle, then more must be better. I actually did do diets where I was eating 2 grams per pound of body weight. I've eaten diets where I've had over 400 grams of protein for months on end. It was absolutely awful and horrendous to try to get that much protein in. And then I found out it wasn't even really helpful. It didn't really help me grow more. There was an upper limit to what was useful. Typically, most of my clients who, when we're really driving muscle growth, we land somewhere between 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of lean body weight. Some people will use the 1.5 and it looks like it's beneficial. If we go less, they feel like a little flat. They feel a little not as recovered for the workouts. Like we actually do see a negative response if we go less. Others, if they're at 1 and we've pushed higher, it didn't really matter much for them. It didn't really make a big difference. They actually just had more trouble trying to eat that much food, but we didn't see a growth difference. So most of my clients, when their goal is building muscle tissue, we fall somewhere between that 1 to 1.5 grams per lean body weight. However, if somebody's new to this and they find out that right now they're only eating barely 0.6 grams per pound of lean body weight, you don't have to jump right to 1 gram. You can kind of work your way up over time, over a couple weeks, over a couple months, and make sure that it's a learned habit and like a sustainable habit. You don't just want to make a huge jump that you can't maintain. But that is where we're aiming, is 1 gram per pound of lean body weight. Fats, dietary fats, they give us energy. We can use them for energy. Our body breaks them down and uses it for energy. but they're also helpful for hormonal health, vitamin absorption, cell function. They definitely do some things in our body, so we do need fat. However, we don't need very much. Typically, the recommended amount is going to be somewhere around 20-ish% of your total calorie intake coming from fats. There are people who have variable amounts of that and do very well. So it's something you balance with the other components. It's good to have some fats in your diet. The recommendation that I've seen for like a minimum is to have half of your body weight in grams. So if they weigh 160 pounds, they want to have 80 grams of fat at least in a day. I've seen recommendations everywhere under the sun. So the idea, though, that I wanted to get across to this client and this teen and any teen who's listening is that fats don't automatically make you fat. You do want to have fats in your diet. There are benefits to having them in your diet. What makes our body form body fat is kind of a couple. It's a large kind of thing to unravel here, but very quickly is when we consume too many total carbs and fats for what we would use, and or whenever we are very inconsistent with our fat and carb intake, meaning we go long periods of a day eating not enough, and then we eat a whole bunch at the end of the day or after that long period of time. Our body then saves it in those momentary surpluses to cover those extended deficits. So the best thing we can do to avoid the accumulation of body fat is to eat carbs and fats because they're going to be our energy. Eat carbs and fats as our body needs them. So when it needs them, however much it needs, just give it kind of what it needs all the time. And then it never has a need to save up extra. So a way of thinking of this is like money. If you have to pay your bills, let's say you knew your bills were only ever going to be $5,000 a month. Let's just give a number. So $5,000 a month is what your bills were. And you had a paycheck coming every month that was $5,000. And you're like, okay, well, that covers all my needs. I don't really need to save much. Would you save some? Probably. You're probably going to save a little bit, right? In case you want to go on, an extra vacation. Maybe you want to go out on a date. Maybe you want to go to the movies. You want to do a couple things. You might save some extra. But there isn't this high, crazy need, this crazy demand to store an excessive amount of extra. Meaning, if you have $5,000 coming in, your bills are $5,000, overall your needs are met. Everything else on that is just kind of as you would want. The body is the same way in the sense that if our needs are being met via what we eat, our body might save a little bit just to help cover reassurance, just making sure the organs would have something if and when they needed. But there's not really a high demand for it. The body isn't trying to form extra fat all the time. It just kind of coasting, kind of chilled, very happy. That's kind of what we want to do with our body is give it fats and carbs when it needs it, as it needs it. We'll stay relatively lean. When we want to push getting leaner, we start to give the body just a smidge less than what it needs, and that coaxes out some of that stored body fat, and our body will burn it off. But as it burns it off, it starts to say, hey, I'm getting a little close to the edge here. I'm going to start kind of protecting that body fat and not giving it up so much. And then hopefully by then you're already as lean as you want to be for like a competition or a vacation or something. And then you let the body kind of recover after that and you go back to eating what it needs. But the idea is to manage your carbs and fats in the sense of giving the body what it needs when it needs it. Not chronically more than it needs, but also try to avoid having long periods of time, like hours and hours and hours, without enough food compared to how active you are, and then a huge surplus of food coming at one time. That is going to cause the desire for the body to store more body fat. If when you do eat, say you went 12, 14 hours without food, and then you ate for like 3 or 4 hours, you ate whatever food you needed for the whole day. If that was controlled to the calorie of exactly what you needed, then you can maintain your body weight. So people do that. It's called intermittent fasting. But it has to be very controlled, and you have to get kind of used to that. It doesn't work for everyone. It works for some, but it doesn't work for everyone. And for the people that it doesn't work well for, during the time periods when they're not consuming food, sometimes they can have really low energy if they're very active at that time, and or they can't be consistent all the time with eating in the evening because they have other activities and other things going on. So the food becomes more challenging to be consistent with, and the body kind of needs foods at other times. And if it's not getting it, it can be kind of grumpy. So although that works for some people, most people that I work with, it doesn't fit best into their lifestyle or into their general needs, like how the body feels. Okay, so that was a little bit of a veer off, but I think adding in some of that information can be helpful. So we talked about, in regards to what food does, protein repairs and grows tissues of the body, most notably muscle tissue. Fats our body needs, it can use for energy, but it also needs for hormonal health, vitamin absorption, cell function, and some other functions. Then carbs, like carbohydrates, our body uses for energy. They are what is referred to as non-essential, meaning we can live without carbohydrates. If we tried to not eat any fats at all, we can live for a while, but then it starts to become complications and negative health impact. If we try to live without any protein, not going to live as long and very miserable. The body will start to decay and fall apart. So protein is needed. Fats are needed. Carbs are technically not needed to life, like to be alive. However, they can be really freaking useful for fueling the process of muscle growth, fueling our energy for great workouts and having a good day throughout the day. They are beneficial, even if they aren't what's called essential. When we look at how many carbohydrates we need, there really isn't a minimum number. There isn't any number that's a requirement because we can live without them. However, the general recommendation is to think of fats and carbs as both being energy sources. Carbs are kind of fast energy. Fats are slow energy. And how much of each I would eat kind of depends on when I'm eating. If I'm eating food at a time that I'm highly active, I want to have food that digests quickly so I can use it. So that would mean that I would lean more into carbohydrates at that meal. If I'm eating food at a time I'm not very active, that means I just want a nice, slow, steady release of energy. So I would favor more fats in that meal. I can definitely do a mixture. Well, one meal doesn't have to be exclusively fats and the other meal exclusively carbohydrates. There can definitely be a percentage of each. You would just shift the percentage in favor of which nutrient served you best at the time that you were eating. Then if we look at the term calories, it's the additive total of protein, carbs, and fats. It's a way for us to control total intake of food. How many calories we need, it really depends on your body weight, your body compositional goals, and then how active you are. There's a lot that goes into it. A lot. In general, what we have people do is start with their body weight times 13. And if you take your body weight times 13, let's look at that client who's 160 pounds. So 160 times 13 is 2,080. I make things easy, so I tend to round to the closest, like 50. So we would look at 2,100 calories as a starting place, just to see, like, okay, if we eat there, how do I feel? Do I feel really low energy? If I'm not feeling recovered from my training, well, then I'll eat more. If I feel pretty good energy, I'm happy with everything, I'd stay around there. If I'm eating that amount and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much food, I start feeling kind of pudgy. My waistline and my pants and clothes kind of feels a little pudgy. I kind of feel blah throughout the day because I'm like eating so much food. Then I would bring it down. But body weight times 13 is a good just ballpark idea of where you start. But then you modify it depending on your needs. So if your goal is muscle growth, you want enough calories to allow muscle gain, but with minimal fat gain. If your goal is fat loss, you want enough calories that you can hold on to muscle tissue while promoting fat loss. So it's a balance point. That's essentially what food does for us. Protein repairs and grows tissues. Fats gives us energy, but it also helps with hormones and vitamin absorption and cell function. Carbs, they're not essential. We don't need them for life, but they definitely can make life more comfortable. And they can match our needs at various times of the day. So you're basically going to have your protein every day, and then the remaining amount of space you have for calories is divided up between fats and carbs, and it kind of depends on, as each time that you eat throughout the day, what do I want more, faster digesting or slower digesting? And that would be a way of kind of thinking through how do we balance our protein, fats, and carbs. Then if we look at what foods work best for you, the three areas that I would typically take a client through is energy, hunger impact, and digestive quality. What I mean by this, I'll give you a little story about myself, is I have played with these concepts, and that's how I know all this stuff. So not only did I go to school for all this, I also have done this my entire life. I started playing around with food and exercise when I was 15. I am now 40, so been doing it for a good bit, and I help thousands and thousands of people. Well over 3,000. I stopped counting at 3,000 a couple years ago. So I've helped well over 3,000, probably 4,000, 5,000 people at this point. I have all their names saved in my computer. So I've worked with it in my own life, and I've worked with thousands of others. So there's a lot of formal education and then a lot of practical education and experience. What you'll see, energy. Some foods, even if you equate the calories to be the same, some foods that we just get better energy from them than other foods. And this has to do with digestive quality, and there's a lot of elements to it. But as an example, I've done a diet where I had the majority of my carbohydrates come from oats for a certain period of time. I think it was like 4 or 8 weeks. And then I had the majority of my carbohydrates come from sweet potatoes. And then the majority of my carbohydrates come from jasmine rice, which is like a long grain white rice. What I found was when I had oats, even if I had the same amount of calories from oats that I would have had from sweet potato and rice, I had no energy. Just blah. I did not have good energy. I found that oats didn't work well for me energy-wise. I didn't like them, so I'm totally okay not eating oats. But I tried them because that was very popular in the bodybuilding world. People always had oats for breakfast, or they had oats in their protein shakes. So I've tried all that stuff, and I absolutely hated it. So I'm happy to know that I don't need to do that anymore. Then, when I did sweet potato, I was okay with sweet potato. I actually like sweet potatoes, but I was very full from my sweet potatoes, so much so that to try to get in the total calories I needed throughout the day felt like I was kind of stuffing myself, and I felt bloated, I felt uncomfortable. When I switched to jasmine rice, everything worked great. Third time's a charm. So I had good energy, I had good digestive rate, so I was hungry enough for my next meal but not starving to death. So it was a really good blend for me. So I tend to favor rice as my most common carb source. However, I have other clients, they'll have a blended sources. Some will like pasta or potatoes. Some will have breads and bagels. Other people will have a mixture of anything. It's really just playing around with, okay, when I eat this food, how do I feel? We would look at energy. How do I feel energy-wise? We would look at hunger impact. So, for example, the sweet potato made me too full. So I wouldn't want to eat that on a regular basis, especially not during the day, because then I'm not hungry enough for my next meal. Maybe I can have it at night because I'm about to go to bed. So that would be okay if I'm not super hungry going into sleep. That can actually be helpful. That'll help me better with sleep. But learning, okay, if I eat this food, do I feel too full for my next meal? Some foods, you'll realize you feel super hungry afterwards. And you're like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to wait 4 hours for my next meal, but I'm so hungry already. You would recognize that and then say, okay, maybe I don't want to have that food next time. Try to blend it with something else. Maybe it was a really high carb meal, and I realized, wow, that digested so quickly that I was hungrier faster than I wanted to be, where my schedule allows my next meal. So maybe next time I'm going to pull back a little bit on the carbs and add more fats into the meal. And then that can help me better balance my hunger. And then digestive quality. Some foods we digest well, some foods we don't. I've had a client where they wanted to try the jasmine rice because I told them that that's what I do, but they felt bloated. They didn't feel very comfortable after that. We switched them to a gluten-free brown rice pasta, and they felt great. The exact same number of carbs, the exact same number of calories, and they digested it super duper well, felt wonderful, and we were like, okay, well then that's a food that works great for you. So understanding that the way in which food is supposed to work versus how it may actually work for you. So it's important to understand that you might find foods over time that tend to match you best. They might not be what matches someone else best. So maybe you hear a podcast or a nutritionist or somebody saying like, oh, you should only eat these foods. And you're like, yeah, but I didn't like those foods. I didn't feel good when I was eating those foods. It's okay to realize that maybe that's not for you. You don't have to force those foods in and be miserable just because that person said so. So understanding that you have an amount of protein you want to get every day, then the rest of your calories were coming from fats and carbs, and then understanding that there's various sources of fats, and as long as they're not super high in saturated fat, that's okay. What you'll learn about fats, I forget if I said that or not, but there's types of fats. There's saturated and unsaturated fats. And then there's also different types of unsaturated fats. But the two large categories are unsaturated and saturated, and then trans fats. You want to avoid trans fats. They're not super healthy. Saturated fats, they do have some benefit, but the general recommendation is out of the total fats that you do consume in a day, about a third or less should probably come from saturated fats. It's not typically recommended that the majority of your fats come from saturated fats. You usually want to have the majority of your fats be unsaturated fats. So as you're looking through that, you're going to start to learn which fats are saturated, which are unsaturated. Generally, animal fats are saturated, non-animal fats are unsaturated. So you can kind of play with that and see, if I'm going to have a fat source in this meal, do I want to have fats from nuts or from an oil rather than from, like a cheese or a meat, something like that. Now, so we covered a little bit of learn what food does and which foods work best for you. Now, what I want to look at is tip number 2, where the second piece of advice is learn how to track your foods and how you feel. This could be controversial, I absolutely understand, is a lot of adults have not learned how to manage nutrition without having an emotional attachment to it. And again, I understand if somebody gets grumpy with this, so my intent is to educate and just talk about general concepts. So if this violates anybody's beliefs, you can feel free to, turn off the podcast or let me know. You can always message me at our website, www.brittlirongym.com. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form, so you can send me any questions you have or any information you want to send. But I do think it's helpful for teenagers to learn kind of what is in the foods that you eat and how much of the food would be in a quote-unquote appropriate amount, depending on your need. So, for example, if we're talking about proteins versus fats versus carbs, it's helpful to know which foods have a lot of protein, which foods have no protein, which foods have a lot of carbs, which foods don't have carbs, which have fats, which don't have fats. It's helpful to know that. And then also it's helpful to understand, how much food do I need right now? We have to kind of play with that a little bit. But we want to play with it in a way in which it's data-driven, meaning if I just eat how I feel, but I don't understand my feelings yet, that doesn't work well. So somebody might say is like, oh, you don't need to track your food, just, eat what you think you need at lunch, and then, adjust based on dinner. If you show up to dinner and you're super hungry, eat more next day for lunch. If you're not hungry at all for dinner, then maybe you should have less for lunch. Well, okay, but that's going to take a lot of trial and error. What do they eat more or less of? Protein versus fats versus carbs. There's just a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of time that is inefficiently used. I do think tracking your food, like using a nutrition tracking app, can be helpful for teenagers because it gives them a data set. Like they can see, okay, my breakfast was 350 calories and I had that at 7 a.m. It's 10 and I am starving. I don't get lunch until 1. What in the world? I'm just sitting around hungry all morning. Now I show up to lunch and I'm grumpy. I had poor attention span. I wasn't even really paying attention to what the hell I was doing in the morning. So it's important to understand, okay, I realized breakfast yesterday wasn't enough by quite a bit. So instead of 350 calories, let me try maybe a 600 calorie breakfast. And now all of a sudden I feel good. Or maybe you double it and you go 700 calories and you kind of have like your stomach's a little rumbly. You kind of are upset. You had to like go to the bathroom in the middle of the morning. You're like, okay, that was too much. But it starts to give us some numbers we can compare to. We can see at a meal, okay, how much protein was in there. If I want to have more protein by the end of the day, maybe this would be a meal. I can see this meal is significantly lower in protein than my other meals. So I know this is where I should add it. It just gives more data and more specificity to what you do. And then having somebody guide you through that is extremely helpful. Then the second point of learn how to track your foods and how you feel is, again, controversial, is you can track body weight. It's helpful to track body weight before you have an emotional attachment to it. Because we want to learn that body weight doesn't define who you are. There are often adults that if they gain a pound, they think they lower their own self-value. They would think, oh my gosh, I got a pound of fat. I got fatter. And therefore I'm worthless and I'm a piece of crap and, I don't deserve food. And it's like, oh my gosh, that is like, you just went like light years of like severity of reaction. It's if your weight goes up a pound and you're just like, oh, okay, well, I look on the nutrition app, I ate what I typically do the day before, and I've learned now from tracking my weight that body weight is very fluctuational each day. Body weight fluctuates 1% to 2% every single day for a myriad of reasons that aren't directly related to us doing something right or wrong, and they're not related to our value as a human being. So if this client weighed 160 today and they weighed 160.5 tomorrow, it is helpful for them to learn that 0.5 pound of difference means nothing, and it is not a direct relationship to the fact that they gained a half a pound of body fat. That is absolutely not true. Body weight is a weight, like a measurement of how much we weigh, that includes body fat, yeah, but it includes muscle tissue, it includes water retention, it includes the weight of our hair, it includes the weight of whether you went to the bathroom or not. So if you didn't go to the bathroom in the morning, maybe you're constipated, or you ate a big meal the night before and you haven't gone to the bathroom yet to eliminate the waste, you might be up like a half a pound just simply because you still have waste in your body that you haven't gotten rid of yet. There's a lot of reasons why our body can fluctuate, and if I had teenagers, and I remember when I was a teenager, I wish I would have learned, or I will teach my kids, that their self-value is not connected to their weight. I want them to understand that weight varies every day for a lot of reasons. And when we check our body weight, what we're checking for is we're collecting data to see a trend over time. So I typically have clients weigh themselves on Monday and Thursday mornings. Usually from the previous Thursday to this Monday, it kind of tells us if we have a high variance. If we're weekends, maybe our weekends are very scattered. They're really kind of abnormal. We undereat, we overeat. It's a little chaotic. So our weight might go up from last Thursday to this Monday. But then Monday through Thursday, typically we have a pretty set schedule during the week. Our food is less variable. Your weight might start to go down Monday through Thursdays. So now, after a couple weeks, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you start to see a trend of your weight goes up from Thursday to Monday, but down Monday to Thursday. That shows us that, okay, if we want to have more a normalness, like a more steady rate to weight, whether we're trying to go up in weight or down in weight, depending on whether we're trying to build muscle or lose fat, I can see that the weekends are highly variable. Maybe if I tame those a bit and kind of control them a little bit more, I won't see such a swing of a difference between those two time frames, and I can see a more steady progress towards my goal long term. So we weigh ourselves just to get data point, and then we see the trend over weeks. I would typically have clients check their trends over a 4-week period. So we're looking at 8 total measurements, and what is happening over those 8 measurements. That then starts to show us, okay, maybe I was up 0.4 one day, down 0.2 the next day, but overall trend over the 8 weigh-ins, I'm going up on average 0.7 pounds. Okay, well, if I'm trying to build muscle and I'm gaining less than a pound per month, I might not be eating enough, because I can probably, and studies have shown, and science can back this up, is I have the ability to gain muscle mass at a faster rate than 0.7 pounds per month. So let me consider maybe eating more, looking at my training. You would check some things out based on that data, and then you make adjustments. So it's just information that you can use. And that's why we would weigh ourselves, is it's just another piece of information that we can make sure that we're efficient with our efforts and we're making progress. And then it's also helpful as a teenager to learn to disassociate body weight with self-value, so you don't have that problem as an adult. The third thing you can do is to take photos of yourself every month. Just wear, a pair of shorts or, whatever appropriate clothing. Don't show the photos to an adult. Good God, don't get me in trouble here. So if you're under 18, keep the photos to yourself and your parents and wear clothes. But the idea of the photos is you can see a compositional change. Sometimes what's happening on our body doesn't show on a scale. Meaning, I might have gotten a little bit leaner. At the same time, I built a little bit of muscle. So I lost the weight of body fat, but I gained the weight of muscle tissue. And on a scale, nothing's changed. So if I gained a half a pound of muscle, but I lost a half a pound of fat, I weigh the exact same. But that was a huge progress. Losing a half a pound of fat and gaining a half a pound of muscle is awesome. And if I take photos, I can start to say, oh, hey, I can see a little bit more fullness and roundness in my shoulder muscles, maybe my thighs. Maybe I see my stomach is a little bit flatter when I look at it from the side. You can start to see compositional changes that don't show on a scale. You can also try on clothes. Maybe you have a certain shirt you try on every month, a certain pair of pants, and then you can see and actually feel the compositional changes. Are the pants a little looser around the waist? Are they tighter across the shoulders? Are they a little tighter across the thighs and the glutes, if that's your goal? You can kind of see and feel how your body's changing based on how your clothes fit. And then for this client, he and his parents are very data-driven. They love data. So we're actually going to be doing some body measurement scans. We're going to do a DEXA scan. And you can do this in most major cities in the United States. You can access a DEXA scan to test your body composition. And it's a ridiculously very high accurate way to see body, like out of your body mass, how much is muscle, how much is fat, and then where's your muscle placed. Are you like lower body dominant, upper body dominant, or is your left side bigger than your right side? There's a lot of things you can see. So we're going to be doing that every 6 months. Because his parents love data. They thought that was super exciting. He thought it was super exciting. So we're going to go ahead and do that every 6 months along the process. So that way we can see, again, beyond just what the scale can show us, what photos can show us, what clothes can show us. Those are all external things. We want to see a little more of the deeper details, and that's where a DEXA scan can be helpful. There's other things like a bod pod, which is an air displacement. There's water submersion tests. There's a lot of other things you can use as well, but those are kind of the big ones that are the most accurate. But that's understanding how to track our food and how it makes you feel in regards to like the looks and ways in which we can measure progress. Along with that, we also do a journal where I would want him to kind of record or pay attention to how's his daily energy. On a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever makes sense to you, is, how's your daily energy? If we do 1 to 5, 1 is poor energy, 3 is good, average, 5 is I feel great. How do you feel? And then just track our numbers every day. Every time they work out, I'll have them track their number for that workout. So we start to say, okay, you have like maybe a level 3 energy on most days, but on workouts you're like a 4.5 or like a 5, and that can mean that you're super excited for training, and that could be wonderful. Is the excitement for training amps you up. But conversely, you can have a bunch of 4s for energy, you have good energy, but your workout energy you report is only like a 2 or a 3. That could be that we're a little mentally burned out with workouts. Maybe we're not excited by our workouts anymore. So it's helpful to kind of collect that information as well. So there's a lot of stuff that we can track on learning how to track our food, so we can be consistent and make changes in a known way, and then track how we feel. The third piece of advice is to learn how to mentally balance making progress with enjoyment and unpredictability of life. What does that mean? You will not... Well, here's a better way for me to say this, is when we think about accomplishing our daily tasks, we want to hit a certain number of calories, a certain number of protein. Then our weekly tasks, I want to get a certain number of workouts in per week. Maybe I check my journal and I write in my little detail things every week. We're going to do as good as we can on that, but it's unlikely, and it's actually unnecessary, for us to be 100% perfect all of the time. Even the people who are the best in the world at what they do aren't perfect. They still make mistakes. So understanding that is very helpful, so you can avoid negative self-talk and self-harming reactions. One of the ways I look at this is to make a plan for when you go off plan. So when you go off plan, whether it's a moment of weakness and you just kind of overate because you were super hungry, it would be more helpful for us to understand, why were we super hungry? Then it would be helpful for us to be mad at ourselves and yell at ourselves. If you overate, there might be a reason for that we can look into. Maybe we're in too much of a calorie deficit trying to pursue fat loss at too aggressive of a rate. If so, let's lessen that a little bit. You don't have that accumulation of hunger every couple days, and then you don't have this extra binge where you overeat, and then you don't have this self-hate or this negative emotional response to that. It's helpful to understand, am I creating a situation with my overall approach that creates that hunger, and my body is just simply responding to that? It's not that I'm mentally weak. It's not that I'm, not tough enough to withstand it. There shouldn't be something to withstand that is that intense. When you're trying to reduce calories in order to promote fat loss, it can have times where you're going to be like a little bit hungry, and you just have to say, hey, I recognize I'm hungry, but I'm about to eat in an hour, so I'll just, I'll be a little busy, I'll go for a walk, I'll do a little task, I'll do something, and then I'll eat my meal when I'm supposed to. So you might have some moments like that. But if you're in moments where you're starving and it's just consuming you emotionally, mentally, there's nothing else that you can think of at that moment, the plan is too aggressive. You got to adjust your plan. You likely need to be having more calories than what you're having on a regular basis, so that way you can still make progress but not have that intense of a feeling. So it's helpful to make a plan for when you go off plan. What I mean by that is when you make a mistake, whether it's a genuine mistake or you actually intentionally did it, just go right back on plan. Don't try to counter the mistake. Don't make two mistakes trying to fix the first mistake, right? So we want to avoid self-harming cycles, which would be is where somebody overeats because they're hungry, then because they overate, they do a bunch of activity, like cardio, to burn it off, but then all of a sudden they did a bunch of cardio, they're now in a bigger calorie deficit, so they overeat again. We want to avoid that type of cycle. So anytime you go off your plan, just go right back to the plan. We want to avoid negative self-talk. There's nothing wrong with you. Look at what your approach is. See if there was, something to change or modify. We want to avoid self-harming reactions. Don't try to do anything special to make up for it. Just go right back to the plan. You want to learn to be practical, not emotional. When we go off plan, it's helpful to kind of analyze why. So that way, if it's something you can adjust or avoid in the future, that can be very helpful. But don't get emotional with it. Don't assign like character components. Meaning, I went off my plan, it must be because I'm emotionally weak or mentally weak. No, if you went off your plan, it's because you were hungry. Why was I hungry? Like, just be practical. If I'm supposed to be eating more to gain muscle mass, but I just felt so stuffed and I was tired, so I went to bed instead of having my last meal. That's okay. So, think through, okay, does this happen on a regular basis? If so, maybe that last meal isn't a good time to have that meal. Maybe I can push some of those calories earlier in the day. Maybe I can have the calories in what's considered very calorically dense foods. So, like an ounce or two, a tablespoon or two of oil can have a lot of calories. But you're not going to really notice that, like in the sense of like a meal. Say you have rice with a meal, and you pour on 2 tablespoons of oil. That can add like 90 calories to the meal, but you're not going to be overly stuffed because you just added 2 tablespoons of oil, right? There are certain foods we can have that just have more calories per volume of food, and if you're stuffing yourself all the time, and that's causing you to make mistakes and not be hungry, maybe we can have foods that are more calorically dense, so you don't need as much volume of the food. So there's a lot to look into. And it's helpful to be practical. Is if I go off plan, why? And if it's happening on a regular basis, what's some adjustments I can make to that? Second thing is to learn to be okay with imperfection. You will not be perfect. You don't even have to be perfect. I've helped people get pro cards in aesthetic sports, and they were not perfect along the way. I've helped people win, get elite totals in powerlifting, national records, even a world record. Were they perfect? No. Helped high school kids get D1 scholarships for sports. Were they perfect? Absolutely not. You name it. And you can actually see on my website, the homepage, you can see how many categories of clients I work with. And I've worked with professional athletes, Olympic athletes, you name it, everybody. I've been very blessed, knock on wood. Thank God, I've gotten to work with a lot of variety of people. I love it. No one is perfect. Absolutely no one is perfect. If you're struggling with imperfection in your life, a really good book would be How to Be an Imperfectionist by Stephen Guise. His last name is Guise. So yes, if you're in high school, please read books. I will tell you that from a 40-year-old who wished he had read more books. I listen to a lot of books on audio now because I'm busy, and I kind of find that a little bit easier to listen to a book while I'm cutting grass or doing dishes or things like that than to actually sit and read a book. I've had trouble when I was younger sitting to read a book. My mind often went faster than I could read, so I would have a hard time holding my attention to a book. And I wish I would have known when I was younger that was just the way it was and how to kind of modify and work with that. But I didn't read a lot when I was younger, and partly was because I didn't understand how to manage my mind when I would read. I would very quickly start to get kind of bored with reading. So I do a lot of audiobooks to counter that. In your generation, you now have a lot of YouTube videos that you can watch. You have, God knows what, there's probably more things I'm not even aware of. But seeking out information is very helpful. And I do believe if you can do the audiobook or the physical copy book of How to Be an Imperfectionist by Stephen Guise, that can be very helpful if you are struggling with trying to be perfect and feeling negative towards yourself when you're not. It's learning to be an imperfectionist and to recognize that that's actually how everyone is. That's reality. Is you can be perfect at certain things for short periods of time, but that isn't a lifelong sustainable way to behave or to have an expectation of yourself. The third thing here under the third tip is to understand seasonal adjustment to balance mental health. What I mean by this are actual seasons of life. So when you're around a lot of holidays, to understand that your food choice might vary, your food schedule might vary, your activities might vary. Maybe you typically train on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but now all of a sudden you're not going to be able to work out on Friday, so you got to put it in on Thursday or Tuesday, and just learning how to modify and make changes. And then conceptual seasons are sometimes you just feel a little burned out. You push yourself for a while, but our willpower and our dedication to things is kind of like a muscle. When I do squats, and I do really heavy squats, I can't just do that every day to the max of my ability. If I do a squat workout, I know that I'm supposed to take some days to recover and let my muscles grow. And by giving that recovery, my muscles actually grow stronger and bigger, and it actually helps me long term. So I push, but then I have to give myself some recovery. Our willpower, our dedication, our ability to make the best choice in every situation is a muscle. And when you push yourself for a while, you might experience a little bit of burnout, a little bit of like all of a sudden you just kind of like, oh, I don't even care today. That's a kind of a negative sign. It's a negative feeling. Maybe you're getting a little burned out. So you might need to back off a little bit. If you put the, pedal to the floor and you're always, redlining a machine, like whether you're driving a car and you're pushing it as fast as it can go all the time, and then you never do any maintenance. You never let the car rest. You just push. You're going to burn out that machine. It's universally acceptable that for a vehicle or a machine to operate long term, there has to be times when it's turned off and it's maintenanced. So you're checking the thing, you're putting oil in, you're putting gas in, you're putting in new parts. You're doing things to make sure it's working well. You got to do it with your body. You got to put in enough protein. You got to put in enough sleep. You got to make sure that you're not redlining it all the time. Sometimes you do some workouts, but you don't have to go max effort crazy, on every single rep of every single set. There is a degree of intensity that is appropriate and optimal, but more intense is not. It's actually not helpful. So if you're feeling burned out, it's okay. Slow down. Kind of check your baselines. What are you doing on food? Are you low on protein for a couple days? Are you low on calories for a couple days? How's your sleep been? Have you been lower in sleep? What's your stress like? Have you gone through like a little bit of a relational issue? Maybe you had a lot of exams coming up. You had like seasonal sports and that was like exhausting. What's been going on? You might need to make some adjustments to give yourself a little bit more leeway, a little more margin, a little more understanding for some time. You don't want to just turn everything off. You still want to make progress. But you might want to relax a little bit and understand, okay, I know typically my calorie range, for example, is 2,000 to 2,500. And I really want to grow, so I've been eating close to 2,500 every single day. But you're burned out on food. You're just, you're on the edge of like, don't even care today. Well, don't just eat like 1,000 calories. Go down to 2,000. Go to the bottom of the range and say, okay, let me just see if I can hit 2,000 for a couple days. Let myself feel a little better. See if I'm feeling a little more hungry after that. And then I'll see if I can push back up to the 2,500. So you still make progress, but you give yourself some margin. You give yourself some leeway. A podcast that can actually help you learn more about this was actually a podcast, I believe, 2 days ago. Let me double check whether it was yesterday or 2 days ago. It was 2 days ago, was 2020 Mindset, How to Balance Nutritional Strictness with Mental Health. So that would be a good one to follow up if you want to learn how to do that. So this is the advice that I shared with this teenage client recently that I thought would be helpful for other teenagers to hear, is to, number one, learn what food does and which foods work best for you. Number two, learn how to track your foods and tracking how you feel. And number three, learn how to mentally balance making progress with enjoying life and with balancing the unpredictability and chaos of life. So I do understand that these were possibly more like conceptual than like specific details, but I believe that this would be helpful to hear. This is stuff that I think I would have been benefited to hear when I was a teenager, for sure. And then if any teenager has any more specific questions, just, ask your parents, tell them about the podcast if they don't know already, and then ask them if it's okay if you were to reach out on the website, which you can do with their permission, www.brittlirongym.com. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form. You can send me any questions. So if you listen to this and you're like, that was really neat and interesting, but I have a couple of specific questions, send me an email. Send me a message on the website, and I promise I'll get back to you. I answer everybody within 2 weeks from their message, and I'll get back to you and I'll answer your questions. I'll either make a big podcast for everybody to learn from. I won't share your personal information, like your name and stuff, so don't worry. Or if you'd rather I just don't at all, you can tell me that in a message. But I will definitely get you some information back if you have any questions. hopefully this was helpful. I appreciate for your time and attention and for listening to this if you did. So thank you very much. And I hope that you get everything you need from this. So if there's a follow-up question or something you need in order for this to be 100% useful, please contact me. Please let me know. Great. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people that are aware of the podcast, the more people will be helped by the podcast. So sharing it in a conversation with friends or sharing it on social media would be great, so that way more people can know about the podcast. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.